Hey writers, welcome back to the Write in the Head podcast with me, John Paul Sperling. I'm a screenwriter and a life coach. So this podcast is where we bring those two worlds together, talking about the mindset required to turn that passionate pursuit of writing into a thriving career. Coming up on today's episode. Zoë DeLeon is a writer-director who works in live action and stop-motion animation. When she's not writing or animating, Zoë works as an educator at the Academy Museum of Motion Picture Arts. Zoë and I get into the process of deciding the best form of telling your story. Zoë DeLeon, welcome to the Write in the Head podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing great, thank you. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for making time to do this episode. It's a very interesting question that we're discussing today. The question of deciding the best form of telling the story. And it's something that, I'll be honest, I hadn't really thought that much about before you and I did our intro call last week. And it's really got me thinking. So I think the first question that came to mind for you is, why is this an important question for screenwriters to even consider?
Yeah, I think some people will just be screenwriters and they only think of themselves as writing for, some maybe even just TV specifically. But I think a lot of us that are writers also, maybe we started out writing books or plays. Maybe we also see ourselves as a director. So for me, since I do those different things, I think I like to be open to different modes for a story. I think it's also useful for any creative person to think a little bit outside of the box in terms of what they want to do. I think it's easy to think I'm a TV writer and I only write specs, because the industry wants you to be pigeonholed to a specific thing because it makes it easier for everybody else. But that's not always the best format for the story, I think. So I think it's cool if you can possibly be open-minded about what format is best for your story, because there's lots of different ways to tell stories. And I've had just different experiences with that myself.
Yeah. So for me, up until you opened my eyes last week, there were two options. It was either a TV pilot or it was a feature. What are some of the other options that we're not even thinking about, whether you've experienced them directly or just that you know of, are in existence and they often get overlooked?
Yeah, I think people definitely don't consider animation enough too. I think that when I started out writing, I came up with a lot of ideas that were really sort of zany, or I write a lot of genre type stuff, and sci-fi or horror. And I didn't really think about, I loved animation, but I didn't really think about writing it at all that much. I did a little bit of it, but a lot of my ideas ended up being really well suited toward that. I think due to just the stuff I was imagining was a little bit kind of would be very imaginative, I guess, or harder to accomplish in live action. So I think that animation is something people don't think about as much, and I think it's really has a huge audience. So that's something I would consider people to want people to consider more. But I think for me, since I started out doing plays, I now think a little bit more about why something works better as a movie than it does as a play, what makes something cinematic, I think, and what works best for visual storytelling rather than a more dialogue-based story or prose. So yeah, I think I'm losing my train of thought. I'm forgetting the question.
Just
But
in terms of what other
yeah,
versions of this could we be considering? I think you've said plays, animation. I mean, that's
and
already two that I would not have thought about. So
yeah,
you're already blowing my mind here.
there's also I know a lot of my friends, I haven't done this yet, but I thought about with some of my ideas, turning them more into graphic novels and things like that, and working with an artist. Because I think with screenwriting too, it's can be a little bit frustrating because you're writing all these scripts and you don't know if they're ever going to get made or not. Because that's just the plan. It's not the final product. So I think if you have any ideas that can translate into a final product, like a graphic novel or a short film or a play that you could put on. It's pretty easy to do plays in Los Angeles. It's like kind of nice to be able to take an idea and translate it into a final product when usually you're stuck in the mode of not having that final product. Not usually. It depends on your level of success. I think for most screenwriters, right? It's like even the most successful ones, like there's a big percentage of our ideas that are not reaching the final product.
We will get back to the chat in just a moment. Firstly, if you're enjoying today's episode, please do go ahead and subscribe to the channel. That's a great zero-cost way of supporting the Right in the Head mission. It takes you about 2 seconds to click that button. If you want to go the extra mile, write us a comment as well. That will tickle the fancy of the YouTube algorithm, meaning this content shows up for more screenwriters just like me and you. Thank you so much. Back to the chat. Absolutely. Give us a writing script knowing that this is going to be made. That would be a wonderful feeling, and most of us don't get that. How early on in the process are you starting to think about this? Is it right at the genesis of the idea for the story? You think, oh, I think this is going to be a play, or do you have to develop it? And I'm just speaking to you personally, like your actual workflow. Do you just let that sort of percolate for a while, or is there just a random moment where you think, okay, I know where this is going?
It does take a while. I'll have ideas. I have ideas that I sort of hang out with for a long time. And I mean, the project I'm working on now, I did start writing it as a play at this playwriting workshop that I'm trying to think of what the playwriting workshop was called, because I really liked this teacher. It was a really good workshop. It's a really good class, pretty well priced class. I think it was at that Water Village. I will look that up later. But this was back in
link in the description.
Yeah, I meant to look it up before I got on here, but then I kind of forgot. This was in like January of 2020, so right before the pandemic. Like in-person class, really great class. I was working on this idea and as a play, and then the class ended. That it was the pandemic, and I was like, I don't know when plays are going to be happening anytime soon. And the idea itself takes place between like Earth and space. So I was thinking visually it'd probably be better for this idea to actually not be a play, because like you have the point of the story is like the difference between Earth and space. So you need to see that. So then I was like, I probably need this to be like a movie. It's more of a movie than a play, actually. That took a while. And so now I'm working on it as like a animated short film I'm about to do. But it took a little bit of time for it to turn from a play into a movie. But if I had just thought about it, like initially, I could have probably discovered that it would like look better on screen, because it's like the settings are so important to the story. And you can't really like get that. You can do it in a play, but not as like cinematically as, a movie. You can really have a setting, like have it be a character. So it makes more sense as a movie. But initially it did start out a play, and that took a couple of years. Well, to the animated final form that it is now. Yeah.
Right, because you work in stop motion as well. And I don't know if that's, the direction that this project is going in, but that's something that, if I could take us on a short detour here, I am fascinated by that. What initially led you to the world of stop motion? I don't speak to many people involved in that.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people that do stop motion are people that are like always did animation, whereas for me, I started out doing like live action and doing theater, and then I always loved stop motion. Like as a kid, I was like obsessed with it, and I always wanted to try it out myself. So I made a stop motion short film in 2011, and for like a college thing. I'm gonna age myself here, but I think 2011 or 2012, and I really enjoyed it. It seemed at the time it was like it seemed almost more doable than like working with a bunch of actors, weirdly. Like that was my first film, and it felt like I could just do it. I built the set, I did everything myself. And I had two people helping me film it, and three of us just made it, and it felt like it was really hard work, but it felt achievable because we didn't have to like work with actors or like a bunch of other, people that time. And I really loved it, but then I didn't make another stop motion film until 2021. And I always wanted to return to it. And some of my ideas I thought would actually work better in that format, talking about ideas and format. But it's like I guess it seemed like the thing people were telling me to do was to make like live action short films, and they were really encouraging that. So that's what I was doing for like 10 years, 10 years or whatever. Gosh, math. And I finally, uh, during the pandemic, I had all the time to do stop motion because stop motion takes a lot of time because it's frame by frame. So finally, I was like, finally, I have the time to actually do this again. And I wanted to return to it for so long. But I had the time to also learn how to do it, like build the puppets, build everything. So finally was able to do it. And it took 2 years to finish that short film. But most of that was figuring it out because I didn't know how to really build good puppets or anything like that. So that process took a while. But yeah, so I finally did, and I was like, I love this. This is so much fun. Like it was just great as a director to like really be able to control everything, like and like doing it with your hands, and like I love doing every aspect, like the sound design, doing all that stuff by hand, like Foley. I loved doing like animating the puppets, designing the set to be exactly what I wanted to look like, because for the most part, because in live action, there's a lot of like, you have to location scout and find places, and you don't have a lot of creative control. But it sounds like I'm a control freak. But with stop motion, I could really make it look the way I wanted it to look. And I just loved it. And then, yeah, so that led me to being the puppet wrangler on the stop motion show Shape Island. So that was my first professional stop motion experience.
Right. Yes,
Yeah.
I saw that in your bio. That was Apple TV Plus, right?
Yeah, it's a great show. It's for kids, but it's really a great show, and I had a great experience on that show. Yeah, I learned a lot, and so yeah, the story I was talking about, I am doing it is stop motion. I love like traditional animation, but for me, I think like stop motion is just the perfect hybrid between filming live action and filming animation, because you're using like real cameras and like it's all real, but it's like has the style of it. It's just a great um just combination of that. It's like directing both kind of, which is really writing both in both ways, which I really enjoy. So that's
And,
that tangent.
and to your previous point about sounding like a control freak, I don't think you do. I think you sound like somebody that wants to minimize the unknowns and the variables. And on a live action set, there's so much that's out of your control. Even on a professional set, I've had the privilege of being on a few of them, normally as a background artist, but you still get to see how it all works. And even with the most professional cast and crew, there's still so much that can and does go wrong. And your desire to be able to control that in a stop motion environment, I think, is very wise. When you said it seemed easier than putting together a short film live action, I actually agree. There's something about once we've got this set up, it's all on us. We can
Yeah.
just go ahead and do this our way. We're not going to get any divas throwing a tantrum. We're not going to get any adverse weather conditions.
Yeah.
Well, unless you've built a set outside, I suppose. But I guess you probably don't do that. Yeah, no, I can see it. I can see it. I was going to ask, would you recommend that as something that screenwriters should experiment with? But I think if you've tried it for yourself, probably the answer to that is yes. Because once you've experienced something yourself, you're a little bit biased. So maybe I'll reframe the question. Do you think screenwriters should be exploring these other options? And even if they don't end up pursuing it, do you think it's worth sort of just dabbling just to see what other options there are out there?
Yeah, it's kind of like that is what's worked for me, I think, because of the kinds of stories I like to tell. But I think any like different formats we talked about, I think it's just really satisfying, like I was saying, to have some kind of finished product. And I don't expect all screenwriters to be like directors or animators. I mean, I was just thinking too, I want to mention, I have this friend who does a narrative podcast, and like it's like for writers, I'll write different episodes for the podcast with like a certain theme. And that was another experience I had that I'd never thought about writing a narrative podcast before, but I wrote it and and they like produced it, and just having that finished product of this story that I wrote, like so well produced and well performed, was just so nice to have, because it's like a story that I would love. It's like, it would have been cool to see it as like a short film or a movie, but like like having it as this podcast that I could have people listen to is like really satisfying. So I think it's cool think about those different, and I never would have thought about doing a narrative podcast, but those different formats, I think like to have some of those things like you can have people go listen to or watch is really fun to explore. And your ideas could, like that idea I came up with for that podcast, I tried to specifically write it for like listening to. So I had a lot of like sound effects that I wrote into it. And it was a nice way to challenge my mind to think, okay, how do I tell the story with like sound effects specifically? You know,
Yeah.
I think it
Yeah.
just
I
makes
mean,
a better
yeah,
writer.
opens up a whole new world of questions for you to address, challenges to overcome. By the way, is this Chase and Cole that you're speaking of?
Oh my
Yeah.
God, Cole. Yeah.
They are doing an episode next week with me.
Cool. Yay. Oh my God.
As in they're doing this podcast, not me doing theirs. That could have been confusing. Although
Yeah.
hopefully, maybe one day I can do their podcast. But yeah,
Yeah.
they're doing an episode with me next week.
Cool. Yeah, those guys are great. Yeah, Chase is great too. Cole's the one that I know from film school.
Yeah, I met
Lots-
Cole last year at a networking event, same day that I met Alex. Anyway, you know what? I'm going. I'm just talking about my personal life at this point, so I should probably steer us back in the direction of today's subject. I think there's probably, maybe I'm projecting here, but there might be some purists listening to this who just want to write pilots and features.
yeah.
And I would actually put myself in that camp. Like I said, until I spoke to you last week, I wasn't really thinking about exploring any of these other options. I think the most I'd considered was maybe doing a pilot, but not just the screenplay, actually going ahead and filming it. And that was something that I was then starting to kind of get on board with. But now, you've got me thinking about things like animation and even hiring somebody to do stop motion or working towards putting together a short story. And I feel like there's kind of energy around that. So I hope that the purists listening to this are open-minded. Have you actually, that's a good question. Have you come across that a lot? Or do you meet a lot of writers that are like, no way, I just want to do pilots and features? If you do come across that, what would you say to that kind of resistance?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that I'm kind of maybe a little bit unusual that I like to do so many different formats. But so I used to teach as an adjunct for the film school I went to, and I taught some screenwriting classes for Florida State, some motion picture college. Uh, and I had some students who it was even a class where, they were supposed to write a feature, or they were supposed to write a pilot and they wanted to write a feature, or like the opposite of that. And they would be really like stubborn about how they thought their idea should go. And it was interesting to kind of try to open up their minds to, even from doing a feature to a pilot or whatever the class back and forth was, or like a short film version, because they and I get it because you really see yourself in a certain way. But usually what would happen is, I would be very gentle with them about it. And then also think like, what are some other pieces that are like this that have like, if you have a pilot, but all your references are films, it's like, well, maybe think about turning that into a film instead, will kind of be the thing too. But generally, like, yeah, you can't, people are like, have their own mind about something and they're not really going to be changing their mind. But just gently sort of suggesting, if all your inspiration is coming from this area, like maybe you should consider working in that area. Like, or I had some of my students were really more into like literature or like writing book or like reading books, and they didn't really watch movies. And I was like, well, like that's really cool. Maybe consider that some of your ideas could work in a book format. But they were like, we're in screenplay school, like we're at movie school. And I'm like, yeah, well, just what are you passionate about? So I think it's yeah, like the ideas need to be free. We shouldn't, and it happens all the time where I'm writing something that's a pilot and I realize, oh, this is better as a feature. Darn it, or this is like, I could write a personal essay about this, that's some stuff too. I think people, yeah. So it's like, I try to think, what kind of stuff are you enjoying reading and watching? Maybe think about why you're enjoying those things. And if it's a little bit maybe you're a person who just watches movies and TV and like that's all you want to write and like that's fine too. But yeah, be a little bit flexible with it, I would say. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Do you think that a lot of this is transferable skills? So I might say, well, I've just studied how to write a screenplay. I don't really want to have to go and learn how to write a stage play or learn how to create a short film or, there's because now I'm just adding to the amount of work that I have to do. How much of this is transferable? Just, again, in your experience so far, do you take skills that you've learned and they lay very nicely over the top of the other mediums that you're creating here? Or do you always feel a bit like, I'm gonna have to start all over again here?
I think that's a really good question because I do, I have a lot of different projects going on and it is a lot of different types of work. But I think it sometimes, yeah, like I went to school for screenwriting and sometimes I'm like, why didn't I like study directing or animation? Like, do I regret these choices? But like, no, all of the stuff I learned that was about storytelling. So I had really great professors and even before that I had some really good teachers just you know in my theater classes that I took. I have like my undergrads in English, but I took some theater classes and I took experimental filmmaking classes and like all of that learning, like it really does transfer over. I think because all of the stuff that you think you need to learn about writing a screenplay, like formatting or 3x structure and all that stuff is like not important. Like the stuff that's actually important is storytelling and character, and those things are going to transfer over to any type of story mode. If you can write a good, like chances are, if you can write a good screenplay, like pilot, you can write a good play, unless you're like horrible at writing dialogue. But chances are, if you can do, or if you're like have a good like voice, you can write a good short story. Like I think that those skills all do really transfer over. I mean, like I said about writing the podcast, I did have to think a little bit differently. Or if I'm writing for animation, I do think a little bit more about character like movement and stuff like that compared to when I'm writing live action. But those aren't like learning new tools. It's just like using the tools you already have as a storyteller who's like curious, empathetic, to and like enjoys character. It all transfers over. Yeah.
I've spoken a lot about this on this podcast with previous guests about transferable skills and skill stacking and the acquisition of skills. I don't think I've ever spent time, sometimes even money, developing a skill and then regretted it. I don't think that's ever happened. There's weird ways in which they combine later in life, and it's, reverse justifying your actions, of course, but it's like, oh, I'm really glad that I spent money on that marketing course because it came in handy making this pitch deck for this TV pilot. And there's so many strange connections when you think about the skills that you've picked up from completely separate, industries sometimes. So I should imagine there's quite a hefty crossover between different forms of storytelling. Something that just came to mind there, kind of zooming out from this and looking at the industry, I think a lot of people that listen to this are fairly early on in their journey, not everybody, but some of them. So just as a newbie to this way of thinking, are there specific advantages within the industry of going in a certain direction, like having a play that you've written or having a stop motion short that you've directed? Are there competitions that we're not even aware of? Are there, academies that you can join? I mean, have you come across anything like that that might help people to progress in the industry and they're not even seeing it yet because they don't do those particular mediums?
Yeah. I think that it's always useful to have something that you can show someone. Uh and I think that I know like I think it's with like theater and playwriting, I think that can be a really good way to get people to see your work. And like I know like I was the showrunner's assistant for a show and like there were definitely people in the room who were playwrights. And that's how they got into the room. So I know that that's like a concrete thing. Like that can really transfer over, not just in the room I was supporting, but in other stories I've heard. So it's interesting you mentioned like competitions and things like that. I think that there are lots of like small grants and things out there for people who are trying to make films. I think there are a lot of opportunities for funding that people don't know about. You kind of have to always keep your feelers up for those because they're happening all the time. I think that yeah, so I would say, and I think it's kind of nice too if you are doing something like a play or if you have like a short film, because it's much easier to meet people that way because you're naturally going to like festivals and things like that. If you're getting into festivals, so I think that's like kind of nice too. I know there are lots of like mixers and networking events, but it can feel very natural to interact with people when you're already like all watching something together, like a play, or if you're at a film festival. So I like think that's kind of a nice thing for that kind of like meeting people out there, talking about the
That's
work.
a really good point. Yeah, really good point. Just the natural, sort of the organic approach to networking would be to go and see an actual performance of something. Just, yeah, I hadn't really given that much thought. That's a really good point. Do you think that, again, my mind is wandering here, so bear with me. Do you think some of this depends on genre? Because I'm just going through my mind now and I'm thinking, what if you only write horror? That feels restricting. I mean, maybe there are stop motion horror productions, there are horror plays out there. I don't know of any.
Yeah.
Am I sort of, do I have the blinkers on here? Do I have tunnel vision?
I horror and stop motion are best friends. So,
Really?
yeah, a lot of people make because it's like I think that it's very natural genre because it's already a little bit inherently creepy because it's puppets.
Well,
So,
that's true. That's
you're
true.
looking back at some of the most like everybody knows Nightmare Before Christmas, which I love, but like some of the even like the shorts and more independent things happening now. I mean, if you look at like Jordan Peele and Henry Selick made that Wendell and Wild film that I really like. That's like a horror film. That's like a newer stop motion. But yeah, the genre that is like perfect for that genre. So if you're like a horror writer, definitely consider that. I don't know about horror plays, um, but it's true to think about genre. Like what kind of genres, like yeah, because like not everything's going to be suited for a play. But also that kind of is cool though. Like maybe if you did write a horror play, like it would maybe people would like eat that shit up. I don't know, like because it's a little bit unique, right? So mixing those format and genre could be like really cool. I think that's kind of a cool idea, actually.
I think, yeah, and that just goes to show how much I know about stop motion and about horror because I wasn't aware of any such projects, and it turns out that there's plenty of them. I guess, what was the one you mentioned? Nightmare,
Before Christmas.
but yeah,
Yeah.
I know of it. That's
I mean, it's the season. I don't know when this will be airing, but it's spooky season pretty much. So give
this
it a
will
year.
this will probably drop mid-November. So
Okay.
yes, by then I think we'll be able to say that. Yeah, I guess I just didn't see that as a true horror because it's
Yeah,
a
it's not
creepy
really
kids
horror.
film, I
It
guess.
is. Yeah, I mean, if you think about like, I mean, because there's a lot of like, yeah, Coraline. I was trying to mention like mainstream ones, but there was one that came out. I think it was called Stop Motion, this past year or so. That was just like a horror movie, and it is like, yeah, it does lend itself well to the
Yeah,
to the
yeah. It does make sense now you say that it's inherently creepy. And I agree with that. Puppets are inherently creepy.
yeah.
So you mentioned a moment ago competitions, and I'm going to be a bit naughty as a podcast host and somewhat switch subjects here because I know you've got a lot of experience with competitions. And I feel like I wouldn't be a good host if I didn't ask you about that because a lot of people listening to this want to know what they can about screenwriting competitions and other forms of competitions as well. What has been the biggest mistakes that you've seen people make when they're sort of preparing for the competitions, and how have you worked with them to correct that, either directly working with them or just giving advice?
Yeah, I think earlier when you asked about competitions that I would recommend, I deliberately didn't mention any because I have a lot of disdain for competitions. And that's why I mentioned like going to see a play or like going to a film festival instead. But I understand that competitions are a big, like I did say there are lots of grants and such. And I think that if it's a competition and it's free to enter, then that's a great sign. I think that there's a lot of competitions that are uh big rackets and are preying on people. So I would say if you're entering competitions, definitely check about the entry fees and make sure you're not being taken advantage of. I would say definitely make sure so I was like a reader for competitions for years. And like make sure your script is actually ready to submit. I would say I think people are submitting things too early to competitions. My experience, I did work at a competition for a while that was one where you gave people notes. So for that one, I get like part of it was like you wanted to get feedback. Um, so like for that, I can understand if you're sending like an earlier version of your script. But I think that one of the things about screenwriting that's so hard is that most of it is rewriting, and rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. And I think that people like really need to rewrite maybe more than they are, and having other people read it and give them notes before they submit it to this competition. Um, as a script reader, you're reading lots of scripts and you're often reading them all in a row. So you're comparing it to the last thing you read, even unintentionally in your own mind. And you can't help it, kind of. You're trying not to, but that's just how it works. So, um, as like clean, like your script can look as polished and like as unique as your script can be, I think are the things that really matter. But yeah, I think you can tell a script too, like if it seems like it has like a life, like if it's having fun, that will really stand out. I know that sounds kind of arbitrary, but I would say like if you're not enjoying writing and reading your script, then like nobody else is going to. And you can kind of feel that when you're reading a script. It's hard to explain exactly, but that's a thing with submitting as well, I would say.
I think that's great advice. I
Yeah.
recently reread a script of mine that I haven't looked at for about a month because I was just busy doing other things. And when I came back to it, it was actually making me laugh. And I was pleasantly surprised by that because I'm my own worst critic, as I think we all are. But there were moments that I had forgotten that I had written. And I think the reason it got me was this was a really rough draft. I was just writing for the fun of it. And I think I'm going to keep 90% of it because it's weird and it's fresh and you can tell it just came to me in the moment and ended up on the page rather than overthinking it. So for me, the rewriting part is without losing that essence, kind of tidying up the structure a bit, maybe a bit of character development, reducing action lines, using less words to mean the same thing. That's my process of refining. And then trying to do that without killing that kind of fun, that essence that you were just talking about. I love the way you phrase that. It's very much aligned with my own process.
Yeah, and I think like I'm also happy for you that you read something and enjoyed it. That's incredible as a writer of your own. But also like when I write their scripts a lot, it's like I'm not saying like because you can end up in a like it's like a version of a doom scroll. You can end up rewriting your script into oblivion, and it ends up you know, but I mean like really making it polished, I guess, and like making if you have I don't it's hard to rewrite because you don't want to lose stuff. But oh hello. Um, sorry about that.
We have a cameo on the podcast.
Yeah, taking the dog for a walk. But yeah, so I would say like, what you said about rewriting, like you know what to keep and you know, what to needs to be fixed. But yeah, I think um that's really a hard thing to figure out. But I think the more that you do write, the more you figure out that tug of war between changing everything and like knowing what to change.
Yeah, and I'm wondering how that's impacted if you know you are actually going all the way through to a finished product. Like if you know that you yourself are producing and directing this as a stop motion or a short, how much attention do you still pay to the script? Because you're the only one that needs to know what it means. What's that been like for you as a creator?
That's something I didn't think about until recently, actually. So it's interesting you bring that up. I usually write, or I've been told that my writing is very like very visual, very like evocative, like a lot more like poetic or on the page. I'm not saying this is just what I've been told. And I wrote the script for this stop motion short I'm about to make, and I wrote it very just for myself. So I wrote it really dry and almost exactly like just like a like instruction manual because it was just for me. And I was submitting it for a grant, and I had like a fellowship type thing, and I had a friend read it, and she was like, "You got to make this like you have to write this like you normally write stuff if you're going to be like submitting it." It's very. She was like, "Why isn't it like what's happening with your writing style?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I forgot. And yeah. So I think it's interesting because if I know other people are going to be reading it, or it's not like I'm forcing it, but I do write a little bit, have more of a voice. And then if it's just for me, write very like instruction manual style as like a director. So I learned that recently. So I think I need to, even for myself, if I'm writing just the script, still continue to write in my own voice and like visualize the way and include all the, you know, visual style, even if I'm directing it and I know what it looks like, and I don't think I need to put it on the page. I think actually I should still put it on the page. That's what I learned.
Makes sense. Yeah, makes sense to have that voice when it's just for your eyes only versus submitting or sharing with an agent or anybody else that's going to give you feedback. For me, just imagining what that would feel like, it would be, I feel like that version that's being submitted or sent to my manager or a producer needs to be a bit more industry standard. It needs to be a bit more what people are expecting. Whereas if it was just for me, I'd probably have silly notes in there for myself and in jokes that I know what I mean. That's close enough, which actually sounds very freeing now that I think about it. So maybe I should do more writing like that. What would be the one sort of, what's the first step for somebody like me who's only ever written pilots and features, who wants to broaden things? There's a lot of information you've shared here today, and all of it's wonderful, and there's so much that we could be doing. If somebody just wants to take that first step towards broadening their horizons, what would you recommend? Is there a certain place to get started?
That's a good question. I would say kind of going back to one of my earlier things, like what other types of media do you enjoy like consuming? I don't really like the word consuming, but I guess that's the word I'm going to use, consuming. And like if you do like to, read books or read essays or listen to podcasts, then like maybe try out one of those. Or if you'd like to read graphic novels, that could be like a cool place to start. I also think it kind of depends on how, like when you're writing, how are you, if you're writing, like, are you seeing it like very clearly? Because then maybe you should consider directing it. Like I know different writers have different styles. I went back and forth for a while. Like, do I also write and direct? Because I don't know. I was going through a identity crisis period. But then I was like, when I write, I know exactly what I want things to look like. And I think I kind of learned like I had an experience where I directed somebody else's play. And I was like, it's harder to direct other people's writing. I don't know if I like this. So I kind of learned, I tried it out. And I think it's good to try things like that out. It was definitely outside of my comfort zone. And then I also have had other people direct my stuff and learning how that feels, and how I would do it differently, and that's an interesting process. So and I learned a lot of stuff. We were saying earlier, like, oh, do you like doing all these different things? Is it feeling like extra work or like, but I've learned a lot from trying out these different modes, like directing something I haven't written or having somebody else direct my writing, and sort of figured out, okay, I do like to direct my own writing. And what's my process? And it's a very visual process. So kind of like how you work. Or if you're also like a writer who loves writing dialogue, like maybe try writing a play, like it leans really heavily into that. Or if you have like a very strong, like, inner monologue, like maybe that could lend itself to a novel or something. So thinking about what's already in your process and what kind of stuff do you like to enjoy, the media you like to enjoy, I think are two ways you can start thinking a little bit more about like opening it up different doors of creativity, I
Yeah,
guess.
playing to your strengths and your preferences.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's a very good summary of my long-winded answer.
Hey, that's the job of the host. That's what we do. For me, I realized this recently. I am limiting myself by just writing because as I write, I'm directing it. I can see it. I can see it down to the cut, down to the frame that I'm going to cut. I can hear the sort of tone of the actors delivering the lines. It's all in there. So really, I need to make moves towards directing because that's showing the full extent of what's in my mind. It's not enough to just put words on paper.
Yeah.
It's not going to be enough.
And not all writers feel that way. I was surprised to learn because I thought, oh, everybody like writes like pictures that like this and like has this knows exactly like what color the soda is in the fridge or whatever. And it's like, no, that's not true. So,
Right.
you might have been
Right.
thinking, oh, I'm just screenwriters, they direct on it's like actually you are director. So it's good
Yeah.
to realize that. That's awesome.
It's this strange world, isn't it, where you think because it comes so easily to you, everybody must be able to do it. And I realized I directed years and years ago. I directed a pilot when I was still living in London, and it was just a bunch of friends that got together on a almost zero budget. And I had written the script, and it was the first time I directed actors. Some of them hadn't done comedy before; they were just helping me out, and I realized they didn't know how to deliver the line in the way that made it funny. And I couldn't believe that they couldn't hear the tonality and the inflections and all the things that make the joke. They couldn't hear it. And I'm like, I don't know how to explain this to you. I've never had to explain this to anybody. It's just, if you put the emphasis on this word, it's funny. If it's on the other word, it's not. So yeah, it was the first time I'd ever realized that not everybody can do everything the same when it comes to creativity.
Yeah. Yeah. That's like and I think that's also the hard part of directing though is knowing how to get them to do it without doing like a line reading, right? That's really hard. Yeah.
I
um
literally had moments where I had to tell certain actors the emphasis is on this word here. Don't overpronounce any of the other ones. And it was like forcing it through. And in the end, it was just about there, but it was still compared that to somebody that's just got that natural comic timing. And it's just a world of difference.
yeah.
It's a very, very stressful experience. I would not recommend doing a pilot with a bunch of friends having never seen them act before.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
not not the best plan I ever came up with, but
You learned a lot from it, I'm sure.
I did. I learned that a lot of my friends weren't as good as acting as I thought they were. No, I shouldn't say that. They were wonderful for helping me out, and none of them got paid. And I was there. We were there for the whole day filming, 14 hours, I think. So nothing but gratitude for them, and maybe a slight hernia at the end of it. But it's fine. It's fine. These things happen.
Yeah.
That was going to be the last question I had on this subject, but something just came to mind as you were talking. How much is AI going to play into your future? Because thinking about the best medium for the story, this is one that's got me confused at the moment because should I be sending it to tech people and studios and saying, could we make this? Because I'm now seeing companies, I'm on LinkedIn, I see a lot of companies like Invisible Universe, for example, they're putting out amazing looking content that they're generating themselves. And it's going that way that writers could start just producing stuff for themselves using these AI. Are you interested in that at all? Is that playing into your sort of predictions for your path?
That's interesting you bring that up because I've never thought about it. Some AI does kind of turn my stomach a little bit. I think I think it's which I don't mean in a judgmental way. It's just my personal physical response to it. Like I think that with any of that stuff, it's good to use tools. I'm not saying we shouldn't use it for anything. I think that like definitely it has a place that if it can help us. But I personally wouldn't consider it like another artistic format for like that I would be interested in exploring. But yeah, not to say like I don't know. I try to be open-minded about it. But it does make me uncomfortable. But yeah, I've never thought about actually using it as like using it for anything. I think also the stuff I like, I think the reason I'm drawn to like, you know, the art forms I enjoy are very like I like stop motion over regular animation because I like the human touch. I like to see like a little human mistake or a human sense that a human was involved rather than a computer. I prefer that. And I mean, like I'm a big fan of a lot of computer generated animated films. Like I love Pixar, like I'm a big fan of that stuff. But I like do prefer to have an experience where I know like the human touch is involved. So I think that's why I like stop motion so much. And I don't know that I would be having that experience if I was creating with AI.
Yeah, and I'm sure at some point AI will be able to do a great job of
Right.
creating something that looks like stop motion,
Yeah.
but it will be a bit too perfect.
That's the thing. And they actually like not to go on a tangent, but with stop motion, like the technology has improved in a way to where it kind of takes away from it. So like if some stop motion films are really trying to reintroduce like I guess I'll just give an example. So which you can like edit this part out, but like you've seen the film Coraline, that's like a really great film. But with that film, the faces that the characters have, they have a seam here so that you can take the bottom part off and replace it with a different mouth. And in CGI, they edited the seam out, so it just looks like a flat face. Whereas like Henry Selick directed that film, he also directed Nightmare Before Christmas and James and the Giant Peach. But then he also directed Wendell and Wild, which was written by Jordan Peele. And if you look at that movie, he specifically wanted to keep the seams on the characters' faces so that you can tell it's stop motion. There's another dog cameo. So it's like you can choose like to use computers to make stop motion look less handmade, but that's taking away, I think, like, and Henry Selick would say too, from like the art form and like the ancient magic of stop motion. And the good thing about it too, if you have like live action or that kind of thing, it's always going to look beautiful because it was always made by people. Whereas I think if you had something made by AI, if you watched it like 10, 15, 20 years down the line, the technology would look not good anymore, because at that point, AI or whatever has advanced beyond it. So it's going to look ugly and it's not going to look beautiful or like, like true art anymore.
That's really interesting.
I've
Yeah.
been thinking about that and why I'm so drawn to like hand created I mean, I'm not saying don't use green screen. Like I love like, I love all kinds of movies. I'm not saying I'm anti special effects. Obviously, I love like all kinds of movies and things. But I think it's like when you think about the beauty of art and like we want things to last and like that's why stuff with practical effects and everything does look usually still looks better. Whereas I don't think that would be the case with like maybe right now AI looks really impressive, but I think that eventually it's going to look really ugly to us. Maybe.
Mm,
Yeah.
could be right. We will see. And I
Maybe.
think that is a great place to pivot this episode. Thank you for that information on, choosing different mediums to tell the story. I think it's such an interesting thing. And like I said, again, I just hadn't really spent much time thinking about it until our conversation last week. So thank you for putting that on my mind, giving me some juicy things to think about. We're going to do the question for a coach. I still need a jingle at that point. It's going to
Yeah,
come soon. It's going to
I
come.
felt like
Yeah.
something was going to happen there. Like, ding, 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 ding.
I've said that for the last 5 or 6 episodes and I still haven't done it. So this is the part of the episode where you get to ask a life coachy type question about your journey as a screenwriter. Do you have the question there with you?
I think I remember it in my mind.
Perfect. Perfect. I love that. Go ahead.
So something that I've been thinking about a lot recently and seemed like a good life coach question, is like how important it is to have a concrete 5 year or like extended year plan because I feel like I maybe haven't had as many of those, and I do like I'm kind of wondering if now at this point I should really start working on more of a concrete plan or like seeing how I want my career to go more explicitly, I guess, in terms of time. So that's the question.
And it is a wonderful question. And I went in a certain direction when I was thinking about how to answer this, but then I actually changed because honestly, this has been a journey for me. I started out, if you had asked me this about 10 years ago, I would have said, yes, absolutely. You need a concrete 5-year plan, 10-year plan, because I was very heavily involved in the world of marketing, entrepreneurship, startups. And these things are highly, highly praised in such areas. And there's definitely a time and a place for it. And I do think they have value. Having said that, what I've come to realize is it depends massively on what industry you're in and how predictable that industry is. So transitioning now into the entertainment industry, it's very hard to predict where everything is going, even over the next 1 to 2 years, let alone 5 to 10 years. And I would say that even the businesses that I've worked for in the past and managed in the past, they know that their 5 to 10-year plan, it's more like a vision and it's subject to change. We don't know how exactly we're going to get there, but we know that that's roughly where we want to be. So here's how I actually go about the process. Here's how I've got my sort of 5 to 10-year vision currently. I start with what is my reason? What's my why? If you've listened to Tom Bilyeu on the Impact Theory podcast, which I listen to a lot because it's about entrepreneurship and business, he calls it the North Star. I'm sure he's not the only person that calls it that, but it's that's where I heard it, so I'll give him the credit there. I like the phrase, the North Star. What's the thing that you're constantly heading towards? And for me, it doesn't come down to money or certain levels of success or anything other than just how do I want to be feeling? How do I want to be living my life? That is where I start with this. Because if it was about things like, a 25-year-old me would have said, I want to earn this many millions of dollars. It would have been pounds, actually, back then, because I was still in the UK. I want to have a fancy house, nice car, all that kind of stuff. But you could get there and be miserable. Because you could be working the wrong job. You could be working long hours. You could be lonely. So rather than setting that 5 to 10-year vision based on sort of material things or even what job you want to be doing, how about basing it on how you want to be feeling? What's your lifestyle like? There's a really good exercise. I forget who I got this from because it's years ago, but it's called the Perfect Day exercise. And you just write from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed, what would a perfect day for you look like? Where are you living? Who are you living with? How are you feeling? What's going on in your brain and your body? What are you eating? How many hours of work are you doing? Where are you doing that work? And every time I do that exercise, I realize the things that are so important for me, really just things like autonomy, freedom to choose, being creative, laughter. So it's not really a specific job. It's just how I want to live my life. Mm-hmm. What I do from that is, because I am a tactical person, I then sort of reverse engineer to look at what my life is now versus what that vision looks like. And then it's a question of, okay, what's the delta? What's the difference between me now and me then? And how can I start building towards that? So, okay, one of the things about my vision is that I want to be, this because we just spoke about this. I've recently decided that I probably want to direct the things that I write because I have a very specific vision for them. Okay, so let's just set the big visionary goal of I want to live in this world where I could direct a feature, an action comedy feature, one of my favorite genres. Okay, well, if I'm going to do that at some point, I can, without knowing exactly how I get there, I can take a good guess that I'm going to have to start directing some things, right? Because it's unlikely someone's just going to give me 50 million at some point and say, go make a movie, have fun. So I'm going to need to build that experience. So now I have an idea of, okay, what could my short-term goal be? It could be to direct a short or a pilot. So I'm just starting to piece together what it looks like to walk that path. But it starts with just knowing where I want to end up. And it's not the specifics, because I could map out that journey step by step. But over the next 5 years in this industry, how much of that is likely to change? I would say 90% of it is subject to change.
Yeah.
The volatility in this industry is unparalleled, I would say. So it's a very different answer to what I would have given 10 years ago when I was very much ingrained in strategy. And there's definitely companies that that works perfectly for because they're all hard metrics. You know, it's
Yeah.
all about dollars and cents, bottom line, growth year over year. Great. But with something like this creative space, I think of it more nowadays as what do I want my life to be like? And what are the things I can do between now and 5 years from now to help me steer in that direction? And also, what can I say no to based on that clarity of vision? So if it doesn't feel like it actually takes me towards the way I want to live my life, then why am I doing it? So it really helps me to cut things out as well. Yeah, so that's why I would say I don't think it needs to be an exact step-by-step plan. That for me only happens over short periods of time. So I'm going to write 5 pages today. That I know I can stick to that. I'm going to finish this script by the end of next month. I can stick to that. These
Yeah.
things are good, right? You get past about 6 months, it starts to feel a bit like, I can probably do that, but it's kind of unpredictable.
Yeah.
And then anything past a year, it starts to get really quite hazy at that point.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I made a few notes. Let me make sure I remember to say everything. Yeah.
That's good to like because I think it makes sense to like kind of have the concept of a goals and plan attached. Like it can't be it's like connected to the type of industry or work you're doing. It isn't going to be like the same for everyone. Like it might be easier for different. Yeah, it depends on what you're doing. And so I think that that is kind of relieving to hear. And I think that it makes sense for sure.
And the thing is, you want to remain open to other options, right? So if I set a very specific step by step plan from here to 5 years from now, and then something else amazing comes up, am I going to say, oh, no, thanks. That's not part of my 5 year plan? If
Yeah.
it really like excites me, I'm like, oh my goodness, that would be amazing. Let's just say again, my plan is to do a feature film, action comedy. And then 3 years from now, because I've been directing shorts and I'm getting content out there, somebody approaches me to direct a sitcom pilot. No,
Hmm.
thanks. No, it's not part of my plan. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's I'm not going to do that. That would be a silly decision. So it has to be flexible. And again, does that take me closer towards the lifestyle I want? Well, yes, in that case, yes, it does, because I want to be known as somebody that writes and directs comedy. So again, it's flexible, but it keeps you heading towards that North Star of why you're doing it all.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense.
This has been a wonderful conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. Where can people go if they want to learn more about you, the work that you're doing, maybe even some stop motion? Is there anywhere people can click through and learn more?
Yeah. So I'm on Instagram. I have like my own account, which is Zoe.antbear. And then I also have a stop motion specific Instagram, that's with my creative partner who does the stop motion with me. So if you want to just follow us for our stop motion news, that's also very cool. And that one is called Joe Shell Films. So it's like the name Joe and then JoeChelle Films. So definitely if anybody's interested in that stop motion stuff, that's where we usually post our news about that. And then yeah, my films are on Vimeo, but yeah, they're linked on both of the Instagram pages if anybody is interested in watching our my stop motion stuff or like my live action stuff. That's it's out there. It's on the internet. It's on Vimeo. Feel free to check it out. The last stop motion film is less than 4 minutes long, so enjoy a little short little
Hmm.
film.
How long
Yeah,
does it take to make a 4 minute stop motion film?
yeah. So that one is the one that took 2 years, but most of that was because of the puppets. We didn't know what kind of puppets we were making. So, um,
Wow.
yeah, the next
Wow.
one I have planned, I scheduled it to where I know I could do it in a year.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, and I also since then this is maybe I'll mention this if anybody's interested in stop motion. I took a class after I made the film. I took a class in a stop motion animating class at Stupid Buddy. And that was a really good intro to stop motion class. So I was teaching myself and I was like, you know what, I need to like, and I actually got like a grant, and they use the grant to pay for the class. Because the class is kind of expensive. So if you look it up and you're like, oh, how is she able to afford that? It's because I got a donation. So Stupid Buddy is spelled, stupid is spelled with two O's, Stoopid. But yeah, the teacher of that class was really cool. If you're interested in learning about it, and also it's the principles of animation are just for any kind of animation, but you're just doing it with a puppet. Yeah, if anybody's interested in that, I learned a lot.
Very
Yeah,
cool. Very
those are
cool.
things. Yeah, definitely. If anybody wants to reach out to me about with any questions, I'm happy. I'm on the internet. I'm on Instagram, so feel free to reach out.
If you want to contact Zoe, just find her on the internet.
Yes.
That's where she is. Now, we will include all the links in the description. Thanks again for your time today and the information you've given us. You've given me lots to think about, hopefully for the listeners as well. And we will do this again at some point in the future, I am sure.
Yeah, this was awesome. Thank you for having me. I'm really happy we got connected. So I really appreciate it.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. You take care now.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of the Right in the Head podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. You know you want to. It's a great zero-cost way to support the mission we are on here at Right in the Head to share wellness information with the screenwriting community. If you want to go ahead and leave us a comment as well, it will please the YouTube algorithm. Therefore, this content will get shown to more screenwriters around the world. Finally, go ahead and click on the videos being suggested up here, maybe down here, depends on the end plate, and we will see you there. Wow, this is awkward.